What's up, casual builders? Tim here, and welcome back to another video. In this one, we're building a mobile storage shelving unit. It's around 67 inches tall, about 82 inches long, 24 inches deep. It's got 4 shelves, it's on casters, it's made with minimal tools and accessible lumber, and it's got a sturdy design so it can hold some heavy stuff. So if this is something that you're interested in building yourself, stick around and I'll show you how it's done. So I'm making these shelves for my friend's newly renovated garage, and his name is Ben. And I'll be making these at his house as well, so that means no fancy workshop and no fancy tools. For example, this is the miter saw that I'll be using to cut down all the 2x4s. It's a Ryobi and it's blue, so it was definitely made before 2014, over 10 years ago. And I'm pretty sure it still had the same blade it came with, so swapping that out with a new one was a must. So I'm actually making 2 of these things. I have 26 10-foot 2x4s, and I need to make around 88 cuts to get all the pieces I need. And as the old saying goes, give me 4 hours to make 88 miter saw cuts, and I'll spend the first 30 minutes changing the blade, setting up a workbench, and making a stop block. And a very important call out here, you'll see that I am not using the blade guard on this miter saw. I think one of the screws popped out while I was changing the blade, and I just didn't bother to fix it. It's dangerous to use this thing without it, so don't try this at home. I'm being very careful here to keep an eye on the blade and make sure that my hands are nowhere near it while it's spinning. Alright, in case you're wondering, here is the full cut list for building one of these shelving units. For the outside posts, we've got 4 pieces at 64.5 inches, 12 pieces at 15.5 inches. These are for the inside of those posts to basically create the fake dados. 6 pieces at 3.5 inches. These are for the bottom fake dado spacing. 8 at 81 inches. These will make up the longer pieces of the frames. 16 pieces at 21 inches, the shorter pieces of the frame. And then finally, 2 pieces at 7 inches. These will be for those middle casters. Cool, so let's just watch me cut out all of this stuff and then we can get to assembling everything. And in case you missed it, I recently got laid off from my full-time sales job. So if you press that like button, it's like a power-up for the Casual Builds channel and extends the timer on going back to a boring desk job. So thanks in advance. I'm a big fan of the website cutlistoptimizer.com. You plug everything that you need to cut and it will show you the best way to make all these cuts while minimizing scraps. I mean, look at this pile. That's all I had left after making all of these cuts. All right, moving on to assembling this thing. And before I started that, I did have some visitors who wanted to stop by and say hello. Whee! Woo! And you know who else wanted to come say hello? Ben. Hey, Ben. Hey, Tim. The first thing that I did was take all of those 64.5 inch posts. I clamped them together on the table and then made a mark 3.5 inches up from the bottom. Then I grabbed one of those 3.5 inch long bottom spacer pieces and then added some glue and lined it up with the mark that I just made. I also used a speed square here too, just to make sure that it was positioned just right. And then lastly, I used my 16 gauge finish nailer to tack them into place. And then I pretty much just repeated that same process all the way up the post, but with the 15.5 inch long pieces instead. We do need to leave some space for the frame later on, so I just use a scrap piece of wood to get the spacing just right. So now it's time to hook 2 of the posts together with those 21 inch long pieces to create like a ladder. Again, using a scrap piece of wood, I put it in the inside of the dado and aligned it to the outside of the post and then made a mark. This will tell me where the glue should go. So I added some glue, positioned them to those marks, and then using my 16 gauge nailer again, secured them into place. I'd recommend doing one at the bottom and then doing the next one up at the top. This way you can make sure that the spacing is right and they're square. and then just do the other 2 in the middle after that. And off camera, I had one of these completed and the wind knocked it over when I had it set upright, so I'd recommend throwing a screw in there too just to hold it into place. I did leave the bottom pieces a little long against the post, which wasn't necessary. Just cut them to 3.5 inches and line them up so they're flush with the bottom. Because I did this, I needed to grab my track saw to cut those down, but I wish I had my flush trim saw or my oscillating multi-tool, which would have been a lot easier. And now it's time to install the 81-inch long pieces for the frame. I found the easiest way to do this was to put those ladder things up on their side and then clamp them down to the workbench. Also, I threw a piece underneath, which helped to keep everything square. So my process here was to add some glue and then smear it around, drop in the piece, and then secure it temporarily with some nails. Then, when all 4 pieces were in, square and aligned properly, I came back and added some screws. I had Ben come over and help me pick this thing up so we could flip it over and do the same exact thing to the other side. And the next thing that we needed to do was install 2 of the 21-inch slat pieces to each one of the frames. We used some clamps to pull those longer frame pieces together because they were a little bowed, and then we pre-drilled and then added 2 screws to each side for each piece. And Ben had to step away for a few minutes, so I Fred Flintstone this thing into his garage so I could get it level and start working on adding the 2 middle blocks for those casters. And you can definitely see that those pieces aren't lined up and not level to the ground, but off camera, right before we installed the casters, I trimmed those down to where they needed to be. And speaking of casters, that's what we did next. We flipped the entire shelf upside down, put the caster in place, marked out the location for those holes, pre-drilled, and then attached them with the screws and washers that they came with. Let's move on to the final part of the build, and that is cutting down the 1/2-inch plywood to make the tops for the shelves. We measured out 82 inches or so and cut it down to the right length. And then we ripped the remaining sheet right down the middle. For 3 of these, we need to notch out the corners, so we marked that out and then used the oscillating multi-tool to make those cuts. And you can see that we definitely struggled to get the first shelf in there. We ended up needing to trim it down a bit, but it eventually fell into place. Yay! Then, using my nail gun again, we secured the plywood shelves to the frame. And that's it, really. Ben loaded them up with some stuff and then moved them into place. This was definitely a fun project, building it outside, challenging myself not to over-engineer everything and just use basic tools, and also building it with a friend. So if you guys enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you could hit that like button and subscribe if you're not already. Thanks guys, and I'll see you in the next one. What do you think? Will it do?
That'll do. That will do.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks guys.